It is my pleasure to host this webinar this evening with Gateway Pet Guardians. Tonight's webinar is Keeping Families Together, Pivoting Community Programming to Support Pets and People During COVID-19. I'd like to thank our sponsor tonight. This webinar is sponsored by Pet Hub. Thank you so much, Pet Hub. And I don't want to take any more time away from the wonderful presenters that we have tonight. So thanks so much for being here, and take it away, Janet and Jamie.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jamie Case, and I am the Executive Director of Gateway Pet Guardians. I'm going to flip through to the next slide here. And I have with me Janet Alderson.
Hello, everybody. I'm Community Director for Gateway Pet Guardians.
All right, so let's get started. We are so excited to be hosting this tonight. And we're just going to talk about a few things. And really, we hope to empower and inspire every group out there to start some community programming in your organization. A little bit about Gateway is that we are, the community we serve is East St. Louis, Illinois, and the surrounding impoverished communities. So our community, about 46% of them live at or below the poverty line. They are, our community is about 98% African American, and our entire service area is about 65,000 residents. There's one animal control that serves the entire county with no dedicated ACOs to our community. We're going to talk a little bit about data and kind of what drove us to make some decisions that we were making. But, you know, we spent years battling a really big stray problem, and it really forced us to think differently and to put community programming into place so that we could keep pets with their families instead of them going into overcrowded shelters. So that's really what led us here, and we're going to go through our history. We've had a lot of bumps along the road. We've learned a lot since 2012, really, when we started any sort of community programming. So we wanted to share that with you guys tonight so that you can learn from the things that we've done, and then we can share the resources and the things that we've put together, and then you know, hopefully we give you a guide to be able to take it away and run with it. We're going to hear a lot about a lot of the word ecosystem here in the next few months. And I think it's important for our organizations and our nonprofits to really look at how we fit into the ecosystem within our community and think about how we can help the community as a whole. And I think community programming plays a really big part of that as we're trying to keep more and more pets out of shelters and with their families, or you know, empower the finders to help them find their way home. So we're going to talk about those programs. Identifying the need. So, oh, actually, let's do a poll question. Sorry, I forgot. I'd like to know who is on the webinar tonight. So what is your role within your organization or shelter? Assume it's going to show it to me here after they're all in.
Yeah, we'll give people a couple more seconds.
Okay, so it looks like 44% are nonprofit staff members, and then we have nonprofit directors. So that's exciting. I really like to see that, because I think, like I said, I'm really hoping that we can empower you guys to go out into your communities and start helping families. And I think that's going to be really important and impactful as we move along in our new modeling, our new shelter model, or non-shelter model, I guess, if you want to put it that way. So when we were looking at the need in our organization, we started out and we were a small foster-based only organization, and we had no shelter. And we, a little bit of our history, we had a volunteer who drove from St. Louis, Missouri, over the bridge to a suburb, I guess, if you want to call it, east of St. Louis in Illinois. And when she drove through East St. Louis, and she saw in East St. Louis the packs of dogs that roamed the streets. We had a very big feral dog problem population here in East St. Louis area. And she would bring dog food and she'd feed the dogs. And then our small organization, when we could pick up and had the resources for them, either a foster or the monetary resources, we would bring that animal into our organization. That works fine for a certain amount of time, but we were never going to make a dent. Literally packs of dogs roamed the streets. You'd have to stop your vehicles. There would be traffic jams because dogs were roaming back and forth. And the community of East St. Louis is literally the drive-through route from Illinois into the city of St. Louis. And there's a lot of folks that commute into the city of St. Louis. So this was a really big problem. And for me personally, I'm from that suburb in Illinois, and I lived in St. Louis, Missouri at the time. And I would always think, like, why isn't anyone doing anything about this? Well, then I realized that there was an organization who was rescuing puppies, abandoned puppies out of burned out houses, or feral dogs off the streets. And so I wanted to help out immediately. So we quickly, though, realized that we were never going to rescue our way out of this problem. There were too many animals, too many dogs. The cats weren't an issue. The dog population, because it was so high, kept the cat population low. So we needed to do something different. So that's how we kind of identified the need in our community. But taking it one step further, it was just a few years ago that we really zeroed in on what we call Eastside Pet District. So we took 6 zip codes that had the same look geographically, demographically, and we honed in on those communities that we felt needed our community work the most. So my next poll question is, does your organization serve any specific geographic area? So do you have a county or zip codes or something like that that you specifically work in, and you don't go outside of that community? This is one of the things that has been really, really impactful for us, because we were able then to measure what our impact was. We could look at data and say how many of the animals are coming in from our community, and how many are leaving alive. How many, awesome. So 73% of those on here has a specific geographic area. I really think that in these times, in order to really see what your impact is, it's important to be able to have some designated areas so that you can really see the needle move. Then you don't feel like you're constantly running in the hamster wheel. Okay, I'm going to go on to our next photo, which we share a lot. So this was our community in 2012. This is one pack of dogs that lived by this little strip club here, Miss Kitty's, in Washington Park. And this was one feral litter of puppies. So when we couldn't get to them quickly, this is what happened. They'd grow up on the streets. They'd never had human hands touch them. And we would go and we'd feed them daily until we could find potentially a foster that would rehabilitate a feral dog. This is not a great community model to live in. So, having roaming dogs is scary to their community. There's a lot of uncertainty in our community. There's a lot, it's very transient. And it's interesting because with COVID-19, this is just life for our community. When you live in poverty, your life is always uncertain, and it is transient, and you can't rely on a lot of things. So, this was normal this is normal for our folks in the community. But this is what our community looked like, and this is what we knew we really needed to change, and we wanted to be there to support the community through this. And it was never our intention to just scoop up all the dogs and then there would be no problem anymore. Oh, sorry. So this is our designated service area. This is known as Eastside Pet District. There are 6 zip codes that we service, and we looked at what the resources were in that community. We are in a resource desert, so there's no veterinarian, there's no pet store, and there are a few large grocery stores with pet food, but as Janet can attest, we are talking about AmPA, and I don't even know if a lot of these have dog chow in them. It tends to be really low quality food, which
overpriced.
Yeah, and overpriced. You're exactly right, and especially during this time, it's hard to get that pet food. So from there. So we designated our service area and said we want to make sure that we're servicing this resource desert. A little glimpse into what our community looked like. In 2011, when we started to look at data, our county municipal shelter, which is where all of our animals went, if they were picked up, had a 23.5% save rate, and they were bringing in about 9,000 animals a year, over 9,000 animals a year. That was not okay to any of us. So we've worked really hard throughout the year, throughout the years to change that. And you can see now in 2019, it's 89%. So we're getting really close to that 90% save rate. And I think that COVID-19 will push us over that edge. But by putting our stake in the ground for Eastside Pet District, we said all of our resources are going to be dedicated to this community. 25% of those numbers came from our communities in Eastside Pet District. So we knew that we could impact that save rate by targeting our programming on that 25%, and we did that. So we're going to take you through our timeline, but you can see how that affected the intake total went down dramatically, and the save rate went up dramatically. So, and we feel like we had a very big part in that.
And Lisa, I see in the chat you had a question. We will address that later on in the presentation. I just wanted to point that out. So just kind of, community programming has been very important for a while now. It's been a huge piece of our programming, but we really want to point out why it is so important right now to not just our organization, but beyond. The impact on businesses has been tremendous. We mentioned our area is a resource desert. A lot of the places have had to lay employees off, and they might not make it through the other side of this. So we've seen a huge impact on businesses in our community, which then trickles down to the impact on families. There's also been an impact on the supply chain. We mentioned dog food. For a while, it was really hard to come by anywhere. And so that supply chain has been impacted, and not just pet food, but in human food supplies. Their non-perishables are very hard to come by for the food pantries that are trying to serve, families in need, and baby formula, things like that. So COVID-19 has had a big influence in lots of areas. And then go ahead and go next, Jamie.
I forgot I was in charge of that, sorry.
And where are the feral dogs? Are they still getting picked up? We will address that as well.
Well, it was interesting, and we could address that now if we wanted to, but once we started spay neuter, that number really declined. So that you'll see that in our timeline when we talk about that. Okay, so Rory, can you go to our next poll question? So does your organization have community programming to support owned pets in place? Do you have something like that in place already? And please let us know. It's multiple select, so tell us all the things that you're doing to support owned pets. Can't wait to see what people are already doing.
I know.
Mm-hmm. One of the cool things that we're doing within the AmPA, new sheltering model is helping kind of map out what our communities are doing, and hoping that we can get kind of an online resource for everyone. Okay, so 82% are doing some sort of pet food and supply pantry, which it seems like that has been a really big need, and something that a lot of groups did pretty quickly. Owned pet spay neuter, great to see. Low cost free vaccination or microchip workshops, awesome. Community cat support, great. Owned pet emergency vetting, behavior support for owned pets, awesome, and assistance with housing. Okay, cool. Thank you guys. That's great. So we're going to go through our timeline and how we created our programming, because we saw this need in 2011 once we really started looking at the data. So we did a deep data dive into our county's data and pulled out our community's data so that we could put it together. As I mentioned, we had the feeding route, which you know, that volunteer, that founding member of Gateway Pet Guardians, she had not missed a day since 2001. So she has been doing this for a long time. She still goes out and continues to see if there is like a random feral or a mama who had puppies that we couldn't catch or something like that. She still does go out and support those areas because, you know, our community is, I call it like, it's like a urban, it's like a rural mentality in an urban setting. So a lot of folks have outside dogs, and a lot of folks open their front door and they let their dog out to go to the bathroom in the morning. And the problem comes in is when they're not sterilized like they weren't many years ago, and they continue to have puppies in abandoned houses. So that's where we really started digging into programming. And one of the first things that we did was we started spay neuter programming for owned pets. And that's where we saw the biggest decline in intake. And where we started working with our municipal shelter with a transfer partnership, because we saw a lot of the dogs that maybe we saw on that route. We knew them, we built relationships with them, and we wanted to make sure that they had a live outcome out of the animal control. So spay neuter was hugely impactful right off the bat, which was really important to bringing those numbers down. In 2013, so we started spay neuter. We started working with these families, and they started calling us. They had our cell phone numbers and would call us if they had a question or, you know, just needed help with some sort of medical assistance. So we started to kind of dabble in some community outreach efforts, meaning we would talk to community members when we dropped their pets off from their spay neuter visit to see what they needed, maybe provided some leashes or collars. In late 2013, early 14, we had a polar vortex type weather, extreme weather pattern, and it lasted for about 2 weeks. And so we had folks out in the community daily when it was negative 20 degrees, knocking on doors and urging people to bring their pets inside, and providing straw and dog houses for at least when the weather broke. And that started to really build this relationship with them. And it really started to show us a different side of the community. And that's how Janet got involved. Janet had a truck, and we needed trucks to drive these dog houses and the straw around. And so Janet started volunteering with us at that time. And so she's going to start going into the next piece of our programming. Whoops.
So yeah, and then in 2014, I must say, all of this has been volunteer driven up until this point, and I'll point out the point where there was a staff involved. But we started vaccination clinics in 2014. These were large scale clinics. There's not a single veterinarian in East St. Louis, so our goal was to bring those wellness services across the river directly in the community that needs it. And then we also started the Pet Crisis Fund. We started receiving calls from people who were experiencing traumatic events with their pets, hit by cars, gunshot wounds, just terrible things, and really needed help. So we established a Pet Crisis Fund. Do you want to click next?
Oh yeah, sorry.
And then at 2015 is the point, you know, we've had the spay neuter program going a few years. We saw a huge uptick in feral cats, community cats. So we started a TNR program where we actually have volunteers go out in the community, trap them, take them to get fixed, and bring them back. And this is also where we implemented the community hotline. We got Our volunteers were getting sick of getting calls directly to their phones, as you can imagine. So we started a hotline. It's a Google Voice number where residents will call in needing help for whatever they need, sign up for spay neuter, sign up for community cat programming, anything like that. And last year we actually fielded about 1,700 calls on that hotline. All sorts of reasons, they have to rehome their pet. I think we're also unique in the fact that we intake, which is very different from a lot of other just community outreach focused groups. So, we do have a lot of diversion programming in place too. So in 2016, we started our pet food pantry. We set up basically just an East St. Louis distribution site. We partnered with another food pantry in St. Louis to be able to bring that food over. A lot of the families don't have transportation to even get across the river to be able to access the giant food pantry. So we had that distribution site. And then we also had the no-kill resolution passed in our St. Clair County where we work. 90% of our sheltering dogs and cats will be saved by 2021 is the goal. So that's really important because it really motivated a lot of what our county facility was doing, which, trickles down and it influences what rescues are doing as well in all the community programming. Then in 2018, our fearless volunteer that was managing this program decided to move. And we just knew community programming was where we really needed to put more effort, more energy. Natalie Creamer did a sad face in the chat. She's the one who managed all this programming up until this point. And we found a donor and her beliefs lined with our beliefs. And she contributed to our ability to actually hire me on full-time as the community director to really just put more energy into our community programming and build that program. So then in 19, we got a lot of grants. I'll go into more details about those amazing grants. Yes, and Natalie does still volunteer with us. But I'll go into those grants later. And then in 2020, this is the really exciting thing. Up until this point, we had a tiny shelter in St. Louis. It was an emergency shelter, and we worked out of our cars. I worked out of my car carrying dogs back and forth. So we wanted to set up a pet resource center directly in the community. Families had to drive 15 minutes to other areas to get vet services. We didn't think that wasn't right. So we bought a 54,000 square foot building in the heart of East St. Louis. It's the old Miles Davis School. And right before COVID-19, we were planning to open that facility. But obviously COVID-19 put that all on hold. So, but driving through the community now is a totally different scene. We mentioned those feral dogs earlier. Those are few and far between. Now that we've had I've been in the community for about 3 years now, almost 3 years. I see a dog, I typically know where it lives. So do a lot of our volunteers that work with us as well. But what you might be wondering is, and this really does speak to your smaller groups that are interested in this type of work, how do you build community programming like this? I will tell you, community programming was not a big part of our budget up until recently. It was all self-sustaining. We wrote grants that funded it. We found donors that supported it. So how do you do this type of work with a shoestring budget? The first thing is finding a leadership volunteer that believes in the mission. If you cannot afford a full staff member in order to do this stuff, having that champion really drives the programming. We were very lucky to have that in our volunteer that started all of this and kind of continue it. And I mean, that volunteer serves as a cheerleader and challenges people's thinking and just really, and it came after 5 years of successful programming as well. So
and the other important piece is making sure that your leadership is on board with this. There are a lot of folks that are shelter employees, nonprofit employees on this call. And I think you really have to ensure that your leadership is behind this. And that volunteer or staff member does Janet challenges our thinking every single day, because you're working with a community that lives in poverty. And that's hard for for a lot of people to wrap their brain around. We are a very affluent, white, driven, group of leaders, generally speaking, and oftentimes those aren't the people that we're helping. So your leadership has to be on board, because you are going to be doing things differently than this industry has ever told us to do in the past. So that might even be step one, is make sure that your leadership is on board.
Also finding donated resources. Your programming does, you get donated collars, leashes every day as a shelter or as a rescue. Starting to allocate some of those resources into supporting community members is important. Our vaccine clinics were all volunteer run. We didn't pay anyone. We asked our local vets to be vets and we had some vet techs come out. We asked trainers to come out. We asked photographers to come out. For dog houses, Boy Scout troops are always wanting to help build supplies. So dog houses, catios, things like that you can give out to community members. And just getting on the radar of county officials too. We have one county official who donates all of the straw to our organization. So just making, partnerships in the community as well. Go ahead, sorry.
We partnered with animal control on rabies vaccines and registrations as well. So those municipal shelters that are really focused, our community was not registering their pets until we started vaccination clinics. So that's that could really help your ask in your conversation with your politicians and your municipal shelter to get them supporting what you're doing.
Also just partnering with other organizations to help subsidize your expenses. So we're great. We have a high volume clinic in our area. We utilize them, and I like to call us scrappy. We're trying to cut costs wherever we can. So, we're partnering with existing food pantries and things like that. And then the next, utilizing the media. So capitalizing on urgency is really important. We have extreme weather, we have extreme heat and extreme cold, and our staff is really good at writing press releases. So being able to send out press releases, capitalize on the weather. We did that once, and it connected us with a donor that gave us a brand new vehicle for community programming. So it just allows you to connect in ways that you probably never thought about. Utilizing free tools in our community programming, Google Voice, email, all the things that we do is free. Forming partnerships is really important. So with food pantries, social service agencies, the fire department, police department, city hall, we'll go into more detail about that. And I also wanted to mention just engaging the veterinary community is really important too. I think a common theme throughout this with people interested in emergency vet care and things like that is are the vets on board? I've, over the past 3 years, been taking veterinarians out into the field to kind of see what goes untreated because the access isn't there. And then those vets in turn, they tend to have interns and other people that come in and shadow will take them out as well. So we're also trying to impact the next generation of veterinarians and have community programming and shelter medicine in mind as they make their way through their training. And the last thing, track your data. I track more data than I probably even should, that even makes sense, but funders want to see that. Hours in the field, supplies distributed, volunteers working with families, all of that is really important.
Okay, so building an identity. This kind of goes back to the point about leadership being on board, because this was something that was needed. As I said, we tended to, as an industry, which we are getting so much better at. I've been in this industry for 11 years. And so being able to see the shift and what has happened with people, there were so many barriers to adoption, and there were fenced yards and no apartments and all those things. Those were a thing, 10 or 11 years ago. And now with those breaking down, it's helpful, but you still have supporters and people in your community that think that if you're poor and you can't afford the leg surgery, the expensive leg surgery, then or to feed your pet, then you shouldn't have a feed an animal or have an animal. And we just don't subscribe to that mentality whatsoever, because we see the need so hard in our community that if we just went and plucked up all those animals and we put them in our shelters, we would be overfull and we'd never be able to get out of this problem. So by working with families and seeing how much they love their pets, we could change that narrative. One of the first thing, my buddy Kim Wolf, who I love so deeply, she did a presentation for a Purina Adoption Options seminar conference. And one of the things that she said that really stuck with me was, we have to get rid of the people suck mentality in our industry. And, you know, how many times do we hear a foster or a volunteer or just that person on social media saying, you know, I hang out with my dog because people suck, or I hang out with my dogs because I don't like people. Well, that's not we don't subscribe to that either. So we really work hard to change the vocabulary. Those are not things that are allowed to be said in this organization. And that's really, that's a culture change that you have to make, and it can be really difficult. We often think like, you just have to think and reframe what you're what you're thinking about, and thinking, what if people were doing the best that they could? What if they were giving the food that they had and that was all that they had, but they love their dog, and it would be terrible if we took it away. Pets are a constant. Think about your worst day and coming home to your dog that you love, and how much better your dog makes you feel. If your life was in constant flux and constant transition, that animal may be the constant that you need in your life to make you feel better at the end of that day. So one of the things that we did in 2018, we brought all of our leadership volunteers together and our staff, and we did a poverty simulation. This is the website, playspent.org. Please write it down. Please take note of it, and please do it yourself. It's free. You can do it on your phone, and encourage your staff and your volunteers to do the same poverty simulation. It really goes through how much, you know, you decide what job you want. Is it overnight? Is it during the day? What are the hours? What's your pay based on when you can work? Do you have transportation? And then life happens. You go through the month and your car breaks down, and your kid wants, you know, to play sports, and that's $50. Can you do it or not when you only have $75 left? And at some point in some of the simulations, your dog gets sick, or your dog gets injured. And you have $50 in your checking account or in your account, and you have to make a decision. It's $50 to euthanize your pet. It's free to let them suffer, or it's $300 to fix that pet. None of those are good answers, especially when you don't have the money. So I really encourage everybody to do this. It's really changed a lot of people's minds, and it helps with that culture change.
Another way we helped build our identity, just making sure you have a consistent voice. Social media it's an amazing tool. And I know a lot of organizations that do this work tend to shy away from sharing these important stories and, you know, things that we run into on the day-to-day, but we really, we have found that by asking the community if they're willing to share their story to help raise funds so we can support their pets and others like them, most of them jump right on board. You know, they'll send you the pictures that they look good, you know, in the right light. And if they don't want to, that's totally fine too. You know, it's important to respect families, and you know, there's some that they might be hiding from domestic violence, or they might have other things going on and they just don't feel comfortable. So definitely respecting boundaries of the families that we serve. But this has been an incredible tool. And I will say, I mean, Facebook it's a terrible platform for trolls. And so I would say be prepared to respond in ways to just consistently reiterate your point of view and how you're supporting the families, and be able to stand up for the families, because there will be things like that said. But if you go to the next one, we've been doing this for several years now, and now we don't have to work as hard because we have a community that really, they'll answer those posts for us. They'll stick up for, you know, families needing help. And we've engaged volunteers and the community in our work. if a community member needs a dog house, they've gone with me to go pick it up and take it to their house. But it's just been an interesting, they will stick up for us and they will continue the messaging. And we encourage people to share these stories. Obviously, there are guidelines. There is training involved. I have always found that shadowing is the best way to kind of mold, and shape how people portray stories and just kind of explaining things. But I think that's really important because it helps, we all need to generate money to help support these really expensive programs. Emergency vet care is pretty expensive. So being able to tell these stories in a way, a lot of times, a lot of groups will share neglect stories, but in truth, those are just lack of access to resources. And so reframing that narrative is really important in this type of work. And then,
so we have a part of that is partnering with the community, and this slide just essentially shows our partnerships within government, the fire departments, the police departments, the politicians are all reflected here in this slide. And we've become a resource for them, and they're a resource for us. And that's a really important partnership to start building, because if you're all working together, you can get a lot more done. And, to Janet's point about our, empowering our volunteers to speak the same language as us, it's been really neat to see. Even things like a lost pet, trying to find I see our volunteers, and I'm not trolling, but I see our volunteers on other Facebook pages say things like, that pet might just be right around the corner, or just because it looks like that, maybe they couldn't get to the groomer, or something like that. They're speaking that really empathetic and compassionate language that we push really wholeheartedly in our organization. And again, it takes the whole community speaking that same language to really see change. And that's what we've seen. All right, making adjustments, Janet.
So our working motto in this whole thing is try, fail, try again. I cannot tell you over the past 3 years how much we've pivoted in our programming, and especially due to COVID-19 has made a huge impact. So this whole section is just about, recognizing when things don't work and being okay with changing programming, and based on what you're learning in the community. I used to pull my hair out at the thought of, heartworms in our community. But if you ask our community, heartworms are the silent killer. Fleas are the big deal to pet owners. So if you sit and really listen to community members, and on the previous slide, we talked a little bit about working with the community, but if you sit and listen and chat with police officers, you'll learn that, the cats are the issue. It's not roaming dogs. And so the police will actually work with you to go door to door. Like we had police that went door to door and shared flyers, and it melded right into their community policing belief and what they were trying to do on their force. So that was really cool. But change is scary, and it can be risky. But I think it's really important when you recognize a need, and if you can find data to support any switches in your programming, it can really yield a positive outcome. So, think about how COVID-19 has forced a lot of us to make big changes, and honestly, we're probably going to stick with a lot of those changes on the other side of this, but it's just really important. So I'm going to go through some of the things that we've, if you want to click next, some of the big changes and pivots that we've made over the years. So just the concept of community outreach has changed significantly. We used to be very reactive when we first started, when we were all volunteer run. Once we had a full-time staff member, we started to kind of dabble into the proactive outreach, going door to door, knocking on doors. And then with the prospect of actually having a building in our service area, we were hoping to have families come to us. And then guess what? COVID-19 put us right back into reactive mode, delivering supplies and everything. So the whole concept of and motive behind community resources has changed over the years. Thanks to a grant from Maddie's Fund, we were able to create an action plan in response to a huge need. Every summer and every winter, the sad reality is deal with dead dogs due to those extreme temperatures. So we recognize, and we were running around with our heads cut off. It was terrible every time extreme weather hit. We would be out delivering supplies and working with the community. So we created this action plan where we are working more proactive in our attempts to, help families. So we send out mass texting. We have lots of phone numbers that we've collected over the years. Instead of delivering flyers door to door, we'll do it at mass distribution sites, like grocery stores and gas stations, and really talk to people who interact more with people to see if they can help relay the message. We've partnered, there's a newspaper in our service area that only services East St. Louis. So we partner with the Monitor and post ads in there. We have a really good relationship with them. We just distribute crates. The first extreme weather in 2013, we really focused on getting dog houses out in the community. Now dog houses have really saturated. I mean, we're always delivering more, but the next step was bringing pets inside and delivering crates. And the next step will even be supporting those pet owners in crate training. Because you can imagine those yard dogs, bringing them inside, putting them in a crate is very, very difficult sometimes. If you want to go next, and I know we are down to 15 minutes. Then, in an effort to work smarter, not harder, we took it a step further and had people come to us to get straw instead of trying to deliver it out in the community. And that was an incredible, it was just amazing. People came, they flocked, they lined their vehicles with garbage bags, and they were really excited to get straw to line the dog houses to prepare. And I will tell you, this year, it felt like there was no winter at all because we just had that ease of mind knowing all that was out there. So we did our vaccine clinics for several years, but I think the last large scale vaccine clinic we did, about 75% of the animals were already fixed through our program. I'm guilty. One of the driving factors is I want to meet new clients and get them signed up for spay neuter. So we started this concept of a pop-up vaccine clinic where we actually go into focus neighborhoods. So it might be because there's a lot of roaming dogs and we really just want to get identification in them. Or there's a parvo outbreak on this block and we really want to get all of them vaccinated. Or we just haven't worked in that neighborhood before. So we did these pop-up clinics, and I will say they're a lot easier to coordinate. You only need one vet and very minimal volunteers. And you hit a lot of families that you otherwise would have not have hit. I mean, we uncovered a lot of medical needs beyond just even spay neuter. There were pets that just needed the assistance that we've never been able to connect with before. So that was a big pivot for us. Lost Found Pet Team, again, Maddie's Fund supported this grant funding, and we've created this Lost Found Pet program where we are encouraging, our narrative is we're encouraging people to knock on doors, try and return dogs home, and supporting community members in being active and printing out flyers and hanging them on signs and providing incentives for the community to do the work for us, basically.
And to just circle back to, like, our efforts are really grassroots based because our community is, again, a lot of them are at or below the poverty line. So technology is not a great source of information for us. That's why we use mass texting. We hand walk flyers, canvas around neighborhoods when we're doing pop-up clinics for found or lost pets. All of those really boots on the ground efforts are what get us the most bang for our buck, because again, technology is just not going to do it when you don't have a phone or you don't have the internet and things like that. So
it does work too. With the flyers up, people they've discovered it. It's been amazing. So in response to COVID-19, this East St. Louis saw a lot of need, not just, in pets, but also in helping human social service agencies. So this COAD was created. It's Community Organizations Active in Disaster. It's a local network of nonprofits, social service agencies, healthcare facilities, things like that, aimed at collaborating together. And so I joined that, and at first the conversations were very weird. People were, why is this animal welfare organization on here? That's so weird. But now, we've really embraced collaboration. So over the weekend, we supplied a mass distribution with pet food. We're starting to form partnerships with food pantries to be able to bring food to them. So, trying to find those, there's also coalitions in the area. We're a member of a Metro East Coalition. So finding ways to just be more involved in the community has been really helpful.
And human services. And a big part of this is, we're trying to limit our vulnerable communities' exposure as well. So if they have to go someplace and get formula for their baby and diapers, and a different place to get pet food and a different place to get non-perishables, we're now exposing them to 4 different locations when if we can all work together, we can start to streamline those services.
So we've had the Pet Crisis Fund for years, but I will say that has morphed. The requirements even. So when we first started the Pet Crisis Fund, it was solely grant funded, and it was self-sustaining. So we had to make some really tough decisions. We kept the average cost of each case down to about $200. And we had some really, we had requirements where pets had to be spay-neutered. That caused, I'm the first to admit, a lot of crying because, pets are not receiving services that are in desperate need. And it's just, those are very tough conversations. So this year we actually removed that requirement. And I will tell you, it's one of the best things we've ever done because those conversations are much easier to have on the other side of a crisis. Families, if you're willing to help them, they're much more willing to have that conversation. Obviously, in times of crisis, it's heated. It's just really hard to have that conversation. They don't want to think about it. They want to keep their pet alive. So, and it's also morphed into, we do a lot of end of life support. I think that's really important. It's one of my babies. I really, really appreciate being able to provide families who cannot afford a full service vet to provide euthanasia. Instead, the alternative, like we talked about that poverty simulation earlier, is to leave your pet, in the basement suffering. So, we provide end-of-life care, and at most municipal shelters you can't be there with your pet. You can get free euthanasia typically, owner requested euthanasia, but there's just providing a dignified way for families to be with their pet in the end is really important to us too. Pet food pantry, again, we used to partner with another organization across the river, and they're massive. They serve over 200 families. So in order to keep running, they had to have some pretty strict requirements for receiving, assistance. What we ran into in our community, though, with dogs roaming and strays, people would find animals and want to do what was right and really help the animal. And in all of our conversations, we want to empower the community, right? So having restrictions such as, you cannot get new pets, you must spay neuter, all of these requirements, it really, we had this lost found pet programming and we wanted people to hang on to, dogs, but then they were scared to get attached or they were scared that they would lose. Somehow someone would find out they had that dog in their backyard, and it was difficult. So we brought the pantry in-house, and we've eliminated those. Spay neuter is still kind of tied into this program. So this is my baby. I'm really excited about it. But the WAG program, families can apply. They get this really cool little card, and they actually get access to all sorts of things at our new facility. So I think it's important to, clarify people that come and receive services through this. Again, it's generational poverty. The families are going to need continued help. They're going to come back and they're going to come back. And that's where we just want to support them. So this is our way of making a holistic support for families. So there's discounted grooming, free consultations with pet support specialists to have those one-on-one conversations and things like that. So that's the WAG program, and we were about to launch it, and then COVID-19 hit, so we're going to launch that here soon, hopefully.
So next steps for us, and I'll quickly go through this because I want to get to questions, but this is our building that will be open soon. We're hoping that we can open in July, and we're pivoting what we're doing. And our goal is to open our clinic with more days a week for that accessible vet care. Equitable access to vet care is a really big issue in our entire industry. And we want to help to alleviate that stress for pet owners. So we'll open up soon, which we're very excited about. This is our contact information. Janet has put together all of this information, SOPs, job descriptions, anything you could possibly want to jumpstart this program up here in this box for more resources in that little bit.ly link there. So I want to get to questions. I can't see the question.
The what kind of incentives to help get community involved? I think that's in reference to the Lost Found Pet programming. I believe t-shirts. What we found, we had free t-shirts at one of our vaccine clinics, and those went like wildfire, and families were wearing them for, I'm not kidding, years. 5 years later, they would still wear them. So t-shirts were one idea. We also, in our intake area or our pet support area, we have a lot of empty walls. So we were hoping to be able to take photos of finders with dogs that they've helped return home, or if they end up adopting their dog and things like that, and really starting to celebrate those really important things and making it a part of just everyday, conversations. So.
And as far as leadership is concerned in those communities, Natalie and I, who was the volunteer prior to Janet, we sat down with the community leadership, the politicians and government officials. They know that there is an issue with animals in their community. So if you come from a city that has a stray problem or has animals that are perceived to be neglected, reach out to your public officials in that community and talk to them. They know, and they know what their community wants, and that's a great into that conversation. We had a relationship with the mayor at the time, and that he helped launch this whole thing for the community, really, for us. We had billboards in the community. He spread that message because it's word of mouth in our community is so strong. So if you can get a few people that are supporting what you're doing, that message spreads like wildfire.
Will we get a copy of today's presentation? I think Rory, I'm assuming yes, but I can also put the presentation on that link in the top right as well, if you want to write that down. And then, do you have a vet on staff that runs your clinic, helps with vaccination clinics, spay, neuter, etc.? How is your low-cost free clinic funded?
So in the beginning, it was just, we reached out to our full service vet because we run a foster program. So we provide a lot of work for our full service vets, and so they wanted to help, and so they would volunteer with their vet techs on those clinic days. And then we reached out to donors. Distemper vaccines are cheap. Rabies vaccines, again, were covered by the municipal shelter along with rabies certificates and registrations. So we're scrappy. We just reached out to anyone and everyone that could help. Purina is here in our backyard, so we reached out to them for bowls or treats or whatever we could. Just ask people, and they want to help.
Then do you use any crowdfunding such as Waggle to help raise funds for owned animals? Yes, we do try. That is always the first step. We try to encourage families to post on their own Facebook, and to Waggle is on our site where they can go. What we have found is a lot of times families really need help crafting the message, the urgency, having conversations with vets about what they need. And taking photos as well. A lot of the photos I get from, families, it's dim lighting and it really won't probably raise much money. So being able to coach families through that process has been really impactful. Or a lot of times them giving us permission to post it on our Facebook page, but asking them to share on their own and on their private pages. That way we can reach their friends and their family as well. And yeah, let's see. I think that's the last question. Any other questions?
Yeah. felt like we jibber jabbered a lot, and then we didn't leave a lot of time for questions.
That's been really, really great. Thank you so much. And yes, this is recorded and will be available on the American Pets Alive website. I'll send a link out also to everybody. Thank you so much, Jamie and Janet. This has been great information. And thanks again to Pet Hub for sponsoring this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you guys all. And we're here to answer questions. Janet has been chatting with people for the last couple of weeks, giving guidance and talking through some programming questions that folks had. And I hope that we inspired you guys to do some pieces of community programming within your community, and start to change that messaging to, just be more empathetic and judgment-free in the services that you're offering. The other point that I would like to make while we still have a couple minutes is the community work can be very taxing. So as an executive director of an organization that does a lot of community work in an impoverished community, I would, if you're going to fully invest in community programming and want to hire a community director of some sort, I would find someone or look for someone with a social work background. Social workers tend to have and learn the coping skills that are needed to work with people living in generational poverty, because the work can be hard. You're seeing humans in situations that are not ideal, and that can be very hard to see sometimes. And Janet can tell you all about that. The work is so rewarding, and that's where she challenges us every day to think differently, because folks that live in poverty are living differently than you or I, and having that support and having that education in social work can be very, very helpful. That's all.
Thank you. That's a really, really good point. And I just appreciate the both of you so much. So thanks for being here tonight. And thanks everyone for tuning in, and thanks again to Pet Hub for sponsoring tonight's webinar.
Thank you.